Greetings from the mountains of Colombia. As you can see, we're here in the Andes, about an hour from Bogota. And my name is J Weiskopf. The name of the series is Ayahuasca Express. Although we're going to deal with a lot of other subjects, that is the core of this series. Welcome again to Ayahuasca Express. To briefly recapitulate what I said at the start of the series. The purpose of this series of videos is to win me some recognition as a writer. I hate to be a showman, but nowadays it seems there's no alternative. Reluctantly speaking about subjects that I much prefer to write about. I hope it's attractive anyway. Next, it's centered on ayahuasca because that is something I've had a certain experience of. But ayahuasca, in its wider meaning, touches on many different aspects of life. So, as I said before, the first part is a progression through a number of sacred plants or drugs or medicinal plants, indigenous medicinal plants. And when I've exhausted that, which will take a while, I will go on to other subjects that interest me, like writers I like, or, funny anecdotes that have happened in my life. Whatever emerges, this is not planned much in advance. But I'm starting with the progression through the plants. Now, last time I talked a bit about my romance with marijuana, and this was the divorce. And I said that it was Yajé, the Colombian name for ayahuasca, which rid me of the habit almost miraculously. But in fact, the two periods overlapped. So I am now going to talk about my initiation in ayahuasca. And to introduce that, this is a book, a novel I've written about the time when I first drank Yajé in the Putumayo, in the jungle, in an indigenous community. And the title is Ayahuasca Weaving Destinies. Now, the argument is that ayahuasca works backwards to shape destinies as well as forward. I never expected to encounter ayahuasca. I never expected to become an enthusiast of it. I mean, here, 30 years later, I'm still drinking it. So how did this work? First, by pure chance, I met my first wife in England. She had lived in Colombia for a long time. By chance, I met her. We formed a relationship. I went with her to Colombia. That's how I came to Colombia. But again, it was by chance that she later met a former student of hers. She was an English teacher for a while, who had become an anthropologist and was working in the Putumayo with this indigenous community. She went there first. She was always the pioneer. If you see the film Amazonas, which has had an international impact, you can learn more about her. But for the purposes of my story, I followed her. And I fell in love with ayahuasca, but it was very painful and very traumatic at the same time. Now, I have to place this in what might be called the historical context. Ayahuasca today, Yajé, as it's known in Colombia, is known throughout the Western world at least, Western Europe, United States, Canada, but in urban people, basically educated urban people who are fascinated by it, who go to Peru to do a couple of weeks in ayahuasca lodge. There's a great number of videos about their experiences on the net. There's an increasing bibliography. But when I started, it was very little known to people like myself. That is to say, an urban drinker, an educated drinker. And I was in at the beginning of its expansion. Again, by accident. I had no idea that this was going to happen. We have to talk a little bit about the prehistory of ayahuasca. Spruce, in the 1850s, was the first botanist to describe it, although he didn't publish his work until 50 years later. Then came Schultes, who broke new ground. But even so, it wasn't until 10 or 20 years later that people woke up to the importance of what Schultes had found. His readership was limited to academics. So we'll say that up to it's hard to fix a date, up to the 1970s, the Westerners who knew about ayahuasca in Colombia were a handful of academics, anthropologists, government officials working in the frontiers, and their neighbors, that is to say what they call the colonizers. The mestizo had gone to the jungle, landless people who lived alongside the indigenous communities and had the opportunity to do Yajé